If you were locked inside, entombed in an armored car by its vengeful owner, could you find a way to escape? Dr. Enrique Ferrari has been viciously robbed a couple dozen times too many and builds a prison on wheels to exact his personal brand of justice. I'm gonna break down the mistakes made, what you should do, and how to beat the trap truck in 4x4. Being carsick is about to get a whole new meaning. Security measures like barbed wire, surveillance cameras, and wall spikes are seen littered throughout the neighborhood in Buenos Aires. On the sidewalk, Ciro approaches an SUV and quickly breaks into the car with a tennis ball, shutting the door behind him. He uses two thin metal rods to pop the car's stereo out of the dashboard and puts it in his backpack. After rummaging through the glove compartment and console, he finally turns to the back seat and urinates on it before trying to leave. The problem is, he can't. This sort of car theft would be best done with a lookout, given the fact that it's parked on a public street with no cover. It's important for Ciro to have someone keeping an eye out while he tries to bypass the car's locks, if nothing more than to provide backup if the situation goes sideways. Now, when first approaching the car's exterior, there's already some red flags about the situation that should start to tingle our spidey senses. This car has all its windows tinted in 2.5% polarized black color. Even the front windshield. Besides being illegal, this car is completely undrivable except in broad daylight, and even then, it'd be dangerous. This car's owner really doesn't want people to see what's inside. Similarly, the vehicle has reinforced frames and soundproofing, which should be noticeable from the additional weight and thickness of the car's panels and windows. We jumped at torture truck of hell, but it may reasonably imply that the owner is running illegal activities from his car, like selling narcotics or operating a gang hearse, making it a dangerous target. Sure, this could also mean that there's good loot inside too. Still, there's less risky targets to go after instead. Next, there's plenty of ways to break into a car, but a tennis ball isn't gonna cut it. The air pressure from inside the tennis ball would not force the lock to disengage. Even 10 times the pressure generated by the ball being pumped into the lock would make no difference as to its effectiveness. In order for this trap to be convincing, the door was likely initially locked and then remotely unlocked when we employed our jimmy technique, since actually jimmying this car wouldn't work with how fortified it is. The timing would be suspect. There's no way it could be synced perfectly. This would scream setup. If we aren't already suspicious before entering the car, once getting in, the immediate lack of sound from the other side should be apparent. We can see from later scenes the car is so well fortified that Ciro's agonized pleas are completely silenced. It would therefore stand to reason that every hint of outside sounds from the street and traffic to pedestrians and panhandlers is now soundless. Entering a soundproof space is not like entering any other room. Our brains are accustomed to a certain level of ambient sound, and it would be a stark difference to then walk into a soundproof chamber. In general, cars don't aim to be completely soundproof because it's important to pay attention to auditory cues while driving, like sirens, honking, or pedestrian commotion. Since he only wanted to take the stereo and not the car itself, he didn't have to completely shut the door behind him once he was in the car. If left slightly ajar, he would have been able to make a quick getaway while staying aware of his surroundings. Being able to hear the street would give him some indication if a passerby yelled out for the police, or if he had been spotted. The additional risk is also minimal since it wouldn't seem any more suspicious to sit in the car with the door completely shut than to sit with it slightly open. Urinating in the victim's car is probably the exact kind of behavior you'd expect from somebody who thinks that you can unlock a car with a tennis ball. Not only is Ciro's childish behavior mean-spirited and petty, but it's also extremely stupid. Instead of popping out the stereo and immediately leaving, Ciro fucks around for no reason. By dicking around and rummaging through the car's odds and ends, you're increasing your chances of getting caught. The longer that you're in there, the more likely it becomes that the owner might return, or somebody catches you vandalizing the car, or authorities arrive at the scene. Secondly, though it is unlikely the police department will spend resources analyzing DNA for a car robbery, there is no reason whatsoever to actively splash as much genetic material as you can in the car that you're stealing. If this is some calling card like the wet bandits in Home Alone who flooded houses, it's idiotic for the same reason that it was in the movie. Now if you're caught, they'll be able to link you to every previous crime where you did the same thing. Might as well sign a confession. By urinating inside the car, you also make the vandalism that much more personal for the victim. And it's exactly this type of vindictive behavior that would push a person to turn their car into a coffin. Instead of Zero breaking into the car, he should have checked out Ome's. He potentially could have won a brand new Tesla Model X Plaid, preventing him from needing to burgle the trap truck while beginning to absolve himself by giving back to the charity supported by Ome's. Ome's gives away once-in-a-lifetime prizes while donating money to chosen charities across the world by using a sustainable fundraising approach. Click my link below in the description and enter for a chance to win these amazing prizes. If there's a car you want to win, it's the Tesla Model X Plaid. The Plaid means faster than ludicrous speed. With its 1020 electric horsepower tri-motor powertrain, you'll be hitting 0 to 60 in a lightning fast 2.5 seconds. That's brains into feet speed. A luxury 4-door full self-driving compatible SUV with a 17-inch infotainment system and a panoramic glass roof might not be what Dom had in mind by a 10-second car, but it will run the quarter mile alongside a LaFerrari in 9.75 seconds. By entering your chance to win the Tesla Model X Plaid, you'll also be supporting Give Power and 501c3, which work to provide water to underserved communities. Both organizations are on a mission to serve as a new type of nonprofit for a younger generation focused on energy, food, water, and shelter. Look good in this premium Tesla and feel good for supporting great causes. For your chance to win a Tesla Model X Plaid and support Give Power and 501c3, go to omaze.com/nerdexplains. Thanks to Ome's for sponsoring this video. Panicking, Zero hurriedly tries to get out, but all the doors are sealed shut and every exit, including the trunk, is locked. He desperately begins to kick at the car's windows with his feet, but doesn't even crack the glass. He pries open a panel in the trunk and finds a tire iron. Using it as a club, he repeatedly strikes the windows, but it doesn't make a dent either. Smashing out the windows is the obvious move, except that there's 3 problems. Firstly, he's striking with the blunt end of the tire iron. He either needs to punch with the sharper end or find an object that has a smaller point of contact, so his impact force is concentrated enough to cause a fracture. He could also try pulling off the seat headrests and using the metal legs as a makeshift window breaker, which has been demonstrated to be quite effective. Secondly, he's striking the center of the windows. The center of the windshield has the most flex. He needs to be striking at the bottom corners, where the window is held in place with more rigidity, so his impact force isn't distributed across the entire window. Thirdly, he does correctly smack the tempered side windows, which will normally shatter, but he wastes time and energy on the front and back windshields, which are normally laminated and very difficult to break. He needs to focus on the side windows only. Our window breaking game is solid, but as we're gonna find out soon, these aren't your standard Toyota windows. Zero keeps at it with a tire iron, and we see that the outer panel and bottom of the SUV is reinforced with metal. He eventually dismantles the door panel covering the inner side door and exposes the door mechanisms, but fails to accomplish anything. The cage on wheels that we're in is more tank than it is Toyota. There was a fleeting possibility that this confinement may have just been catastrophically bad luck or some sort of malfunction in the car. However, after seeing the obvious modifications, it's now become clear that his current situation is the work of someone with malicious intentions. Though hot wiring the car and driving to a mechanic seems like a good idea, the 2015 Toyota Fortuner has a passive immobilizer, which means the engine will only start if the code in the transponder chip inside the key or fob matches the code in the vehicle's immobilizer, so hot wiring's out. That's okay, there's a couple other strats we can try. It never occurs to Zero to use the thin metal rods he used to boost the stereo to try and navigate the door locks. We later see how Dr. Ferrari is still able to remotely control the locking mechanism of the car, and that it is still functional. This means that the car does not have a permanent seal on it. There's an active unlocking mechanism that can definitely be activated, so trying to figure out the locking mechanism internally may not be a complete waste of time. The main thing Zero could have done here is remove the actual mechanical component of the door lock. Even though this is a modern car, the actual mechanism for locking and unlocking the door has 2 electrical points of contact and 2 mechanical ones. If Zero were to remove the electrical components, the lock would essentially become a basic latch system. He would just need to pop the panel on the lock mechanism inside the door, then move the rods and latches inside until the locks pop open. It's possible Kike thought of this, but I doubt it. If it doesn't work on the front doors, it might work on the back. or the trunk. We only see him try one. Since the doors and windows themselves are fairly resistant, the latch that actually holds the vehicle's door shut is probably the weakest link. I would attempt to wedge the point of the tire iron into the gap of one of the car doors or the trunk and tailgate, and then use leverage to try and force the door open. The same strategy can be applied for the window's edges. At the end of the movie, we see that the windows of the car can be rolled down. This means that glass is not one solid immovable piece welded to the frame, but can be raised and lowered like a regular car. If we wedge a thin piece of metal like this lockpick or the edge of the tire iron into the corner of the window, the thin edge of the metal should be able to find the point at which the window ends and the seal begins. These lockpicks have little hooks at the end of them, perfect for hooking that window's edge and pushing or pulling the glass out of the seal. From that point, it's a matter of applying enough pressure to bend the seal outward until it breaks free. With no success so far, and a captor that's far more sinister than the police, it's time to pull out the real window breaker. Zero pulls a handgun from his backpack and fires at the front windshield while taking cover in the back seat. The bullet bounces off the glass and ricochets into his right thigh. In immense pain, Zero ties a knot around the gash with his shirt to try to stop the bleeding. Shooting at the glass right now is actually not the bad idea it's made out to be. Bulletproof glass does not ricochet bullets. Instead, the glass is meant to catch the bullet, flattening it out as its energy spreads sideways through the layers of bullet-resistant glass that is made of different polycarbonate plastics. Even if the round did ricochet, the front windshield has an aggressive forward slant that would have directed the round into the dashboard, not flung it straight back. Even though he likely would not have gotten hit, Zero still made a few mistakes that put him in jeopardy, and half-assed his strategies, costing him his escape. First mistake, firing without adequate cover from potential ricochets. Just because the glass should catch the round doesn't mean you don't take basic precautions. He had way too much flesh hanging out. I'd have stacked rubber floor mats over the second row back seats, then gotten completely behind them, even holding the gun so only the barrel was showing. Why risk your fingers? Second mistake, shooting the front windshield. Front windshields are usually thicker, held in place with stronger attachment points, and are angled, which increases the effective thickness that the bullet has to penetrate through. I'd have shot the thinner side window closest to the sidewalk and shot it as perpendicularly as I could, so the bullet only has to cover the shortest distance possible. Third mistake, only popping one round off. Once the first bullet gets caught in the layers of glass, you can shoot as close to the same spot as possible and weaken one spot with enough bullets to either start drilling your way out or to do enough damage to further remove the soundproofing and attract the attention of anyone who might see the windshield buckling and cracking from the inside. Looking at the thickness of the glass itself in the film, it looks like normal 3mm thick side windows. Let's be very generous and say the car's owner installed level 1 bulletproof polycarbonate glass, which is 3/4 inch thick. It could still only withstand 3 9mm bullets. Zero has a Beretta PX4 Storm. The most common cartridge is the 9mm, which means he's got 15 rounds in the magazine plus a round in the chamber. I'd have continuously drilled bullets into the same spot. By the fourth round, we'd likely get a penetration, and from there, we could gape the rest of the window to freedom with the remaining bullets and the tire iron. Zero did pick up a nasty ricochet wound, so let's talk about that. The angle of the ricochet and his thigh position at impact would have caused a grazing wound at the top. Zero's lucky the bullet embedded in his lateral anterior thigh, rather than hitting the femoral artery, which runs an inch or two deep along the medial part of the thigh. It also didn't break his bone. Since the bullet did not damage any vital organs or arteries, the biggest risk for Zero here is an infection, which is exactly what happens. Although unable to wash the wound with sterile supplies, the very least Zero can do is elevate his leg above the level of his heart as often as possible. This will help decrease swelling and pain. Despite the minimal damage of his grazing wound, Zero's gunshot wound appears to have an inordinate amount of bleeding, so let's deal with that. Shitty tourniquet trope and all. A tourniquet isn't like slapping Flex Seal on a hole and calling it good. If left for longer than 2 hours, it can cause permanent damage to the muscles, nerves, and blood vessels. In 6 hours, you can kiss your leg goodbye. Or don't, because it's fucking nasty right now. To tourniquet or not to tourniquet. General rule of thumb, if your reaction is holy shit, shit, that's a lot of blood, you probably need a tourniquet. There's ongoing debate around the usefulness of an improvised tourniquet, mainly because idiots like Zero just tie a t-shirt around their knee like a kid ties their shoes, thinking that if they can't see the bleeding, they aren't bleeding. The best way for Zero to apply a legitimate improvised tourniquet is to grab his t-shirt, wind it up so it's 2 to 3 inches wide, wrap it about 2 to 4 inches above the wound site, tie a knot, and shove the tire iron in it. Twist the windlass until the bleeding stops, then secure the windlass in a position with another piece of fabric knotted around his leg. Now we're stable. Kind of. In pain, Zero dumps out his backpack, which contains half a soda, the radio, his phone, and what looks like a couple snacks. He seems to think about calling someone, then doesn't. A woman uses the reflection to apply lipstick, but doesn't notice Zero, who shouts out for her help. He finally tries to make a call on his phone, but waits so long that he's out of battery. If you're trapped in a car that's clearly been refortified in the spirit of Fort Knox, and you have a cell phone, why would your immediate instinct not be to call someone? And you clearly only have a moment of battery left, so the wisest choice at this moment would be to decide exactly what you're going to say before you make your one and only potentially life-saving call. Also, this is after you've been in the car for how long already? The battery was fine when you got into the car. At this point, Zero should also call emergency services instead of trying to contact a friend. For one thing, a friend may not pick up or their voicemail may be full. That's just not worth the risk. With how low the phone power is, it'd be better to call emergency services and tell them that there's a bomb in the van matching the description and location of the car. This would be a threat that the authorities would be forced to take seriously and would not require the bizarre explanation for how Zero found himself inside this trap. He can explain matters to the authorities or face the consequences of his crimes once he's safe. Even though Zero was initially trying to steal the car, his life is in danger, and attempted murder, kidnapping, unlawful confinement, and torture probably trump carjacking. The next day, without water, Zero begins to lick sweat off the window for moisture until there's an incoming call from me through the newly reinstalled stereo. Zero answers, and the caller introduces himself as the car owner, Dr. Enrique Ferrari, or Kike for short. He says he's been robbed 28 times and explains the car is completely bulletproof, soundproof, and no one can see inside. He also points out that the only thing that isn't bulletproof is the gas tank, threatening to kill Zero if he decides to rebel. It's important to realize that the gas tank is not the dangerous component here. Fire needs oxygen to burn, and there isn't enough oxygen in the tank to fuel an explosion, and no heat source to ignite it. Gasoline won't catch on fire all by itself until it reaches around 500 degrees Fahrenheit, so a flame has to be introduced to get the gas in the tank lit. But to do that, you've got to punch a hole in the tank to get the flame in there, as fire won't normally travel up a fuel line to the tank because there's not enough air in the line to keep the flames going. The point is, if Kike actually thinks zipping a bullet into the gas tank would cause an explosion, he's wrong, and that might give us an opportunity to rebel. I would only call his bluff if I had a very good opportunity though, otherwise it's too risky because Kike might simply be alluding to a remotely controlled explosive that he put in the car. The explosive isn't the immediate threat, since Kike implied that he wouldn't blow it unless we rebelled. Zero's top priority needs to be lasting long enough to find a way out, or for help to arrive, and that means he needs to secure water. The ability to go without water can vary greatly between individuals. There is some evidence, for example, that the human body can adapt to the level of water a person regularly consumes. The longest someone is known to have gone without water was 18 days, but he had access to a lot of condensation in a cool, damp cell. Zero's in a steel box, with a madman in control of the thermostat. Kike activates the coldest and highest settings on the AC with no way for Zero to change it. Zero's forced to take his shirt off of his wound to wear, and stuff everything he can find to block the vents blasting inside the automobile. He uses the floor mats as a blanket until the AC eventually shuts off and Kike calls back. Given everything we know so far, it wouldn't be a stretch of the imagination to assume that the good doctor retrofitted his air conditioning system along with everything else. One of the most powerful AC systems in the world is in the Bugatti hypercars. It can compress roughly 3 kilograms of coolant per minute, which is how much most cars can hold at one time. Assuming the climate inside the SUV dipped well below freezing would be reasonable. A residential AC system can lower the indoor temperature to 20 degrees Fahrenheit. Therefore, it would be reasonable to assume that a car with a much smaller volume could easily reach freezing temperature. Once the AC starts blasting, protecting your core body temperature is the priority. In addition to the rubber mats, he could rip up the carpet from the trunk and use that as a blanket as well. He could also use that material to clog up more air conditioning ports, as it seems too small and thin to cover much of his body, but a decent size for covering or jamming into the ports. We could also gut the seat cushions and then attempt to squirm inside the foam stuffing, like how Luke Skywalker made a Tauntaun sleeping bag. Kike says that he'll give Zero water if he correctly answers what he would do if his son was caught stealing. Dissatisfied with Zero's answers, Kike lists all the crimes his family endured. Eventually, a cop comes to inspect the SUV. Zero's unable to get his attention despite making a ruckus, and after giving the car a ticket, the cop leaves without noticing anything else amiss. Kike gives him another opportunity and offers to exchange Zero's full name and ID for access to the windshield washer fluid to drink, which Zero accepts. Filling only half a bottle, he gulps it all down out of sheer desperation. While the thirst must be unbearable after 2 days, providing your identity will definitely be used as leverage and put your loved ones in further danger. It also allows the kidnapper to run interference on anyone in your life who may be looking for you. I would not do it. Maybe he could lift my last name for Frost Glacier Freeze Gatorade, but definitely not for windshield washer fluid. After another night, Zero has a fever and is showing signs of a serious infection from his wound. Kike turns on the heat over Zero's protests, claiming it's for the fever. After explaining that he has 1 year left to live, the doctor then reads him the records of his victimized loved ones, and Zero drifts in and out of a fever dream. In desperation, Zero tears off a page and eats it, as well as drinks his own urine. It should go without saying that eating paper ain't gonna supply cells with nutrients, and at only 3 days in, he's a long way from starving. He's just on that keto fat diet. This is more of a, I'm so fucking bored I just want to chew on something type of thing. Water is the real concern. Zero is already suffering from exhaustion and dehydration, which is now compounded by the fever and air conditioning induced sweating that will further deplete fluids. Does this mean he needs to drink his own piss? Well, urine is usually around 95% water, with a 5% mix of byproducts including sodium chloride and urea. Seawater, by comparison, is 96.5% water and 3.5% sodium chloride. So drinking urine is basically like drinking seawater. It's going to dehydrate you, which is the opposite of what you want. And Zero is in an extremely dehydrated state, so these concentrations will be very high. He absolutely should not drink his own urine. Zero organizes everything he has access to in the car and witnesses an attempted carjacking of the very SUV he's trapped in. Fortunately for them, the thieves don't have much luck. The next day, the doctor calls Zero again to check on him. He tells him he's in a good mood, so he's in luck, and that there's a chocolate bar behind the brake. Zero wastes no time inhaling it. This carjacker had a spotter with him in the yellow striped shirt, the one that immediately bounced at the first sign of trouble. Gotta pick your friends wisely. Had Zero brought a reliable friend to spot or create a diversion, he wouldn't still be in here. We gotta talk about how Zero didn't notice the chocolate bar in the car this entire time. You'd think that since he's trapped in here, he would check everywhere for anything at all possible to aid in survival or escape, or for a flaw of some kind in the SUV's structural integrity. After 3 days without food, that chocolate bar is gonna look damn good. Problem is, like drinking urine, the salt and sugar will make you thirsty, and water is in short supply. Zero's got enough fat on him to last a month easily, and if he's in here for that long, he's got far bigger problems. I'd probably still eat it because it. We hungry, and the chocolate is tasty. Let's take a closer look at what Zero has access to. Tennis shoes with laces, 3 keys, a bullet casing, a tennis ball, a soda bottle, crayons, stickers, and a coloring book, sunglasses, a broken phone, pen, gun, shirt, jeans, hat, manual, hazard brights plus his urine drinking container, 2 metal rods he used to get the stereo out, and 1 tire iron. From my Sherlock Holmes assessment, I'd say all this is useless trash, except the pistol, which he needs to use to blow a hole through the side window with. I mean, the fuck are you gonna do with an empty Pepsi bottle, a Bic pen, and some dino stickers? Later that day, he eventually carves out a very small hole through the outer panel. Zero uses the hole to call for help to two men as they exit their home, with no success. Slowly tunneling his way out of the car is honestly the best idea. However, he's tunneling through the semi-armored door plate and doing it on the wrong side of the car. If the goal is to make a hole to scream through, it would be better to do it on the right side of the car, which is right next to the sidewalk, instead of the side next to the street that cars drive down. Duh. If he's already been able to make a crack in the outer plating, that means that any soundproofing done has been undone. Despite his lack of success so far, he needs to continue to work on it. In fact, this is probably the best shot he had at getting the attention of someone nearby. In the case of airborne noises, sound travels in all directions, dispersing as it moves away from the source. When a sound wave front hits a wall with a hole in it, a small portion of the wave energy leaks through the hole and begins propagating as if the hole were the source, that is, spherically around the hole. This process is known as diffraction. He needs to keep yelling and widening the hole. If he isn't able to get anyone's attention during the commotion of the day, then he should try to stay awake and yell out just as someone passes his car at night when it's relatively quiet. Additionally, he does have a gun, and very clearly, if the tire iron can make a hole, then the pistol pressed up against the hole and fired would make enough of a commotion to get people's attention. After heating his battery up on the dash and putting it back in his phone, it works long enough for him to call and begin to leave a halting message without actually giving any information about his situation or location. There is no reason for Zero's dead battery to suddenly turn on again after being dead for over 2 days. Batteries don't charge in the sun without solar panels, and even if they did, you can only charge something with exposure to enough direct sunlight, which is not possible with the polarized windows. One thing's for sure, Zero wouldn't be in this predicament if he had remembered to charge his phone, or carried an external battery or solar charger. And what about this whole diabolical scheme? Why would the doctor not have a phone jammer neatly tucked away underneath the car? Does this trap only work if the carjacker happens to have forgotten to charge his phone? Does that mean numerous other men just called for help? Your victims being able to make calls means they wouldn't stay trapped for long. Seems like a major oversight. Zero threatens to kill himself if not released, but just as he's about to pull the trigger, Kike interrupts his attempt with a phone call. Kike then appears, standing in front of the car wearing hospital scrubs. He opens the door, gets in, and offers Zero a smoke. Kike racks Zero's gun and drops it on the dashboard before he drains Zero's wound, then disregards Zero to take a work call. The moment Kike is within range and uses the fob to turn on the car's lights, Zero could potentially turn the car on and or escape through the door using the handle. He's obviously badly wounded now and exhausted, but he's pausing here for dramatic effect. Fobs, like the doctor's, are proximity smart keys, meaning you just have to be within range for it to work. Even then, you can have the key when you get in the car, leave the key behind, and the car will continue to run until you shut it off. For Kike to leave a loaded firearm within arm's reach of Zero was just plain reckless. All racking the slide would do is put a fresh round in the chamber. He should have removed the magazine first, and then racked the slide to fully empty it. While Kike is distracted, Zero grabs the gun and shoots him in the side of the face, then falls out of the car. He staggers down the street, firing the gun in the air to call attention to himself. Kike catches up and takes the weapon, but a police officer spots the two men. The doctor tries to play it off as a misunderstanding between friends, but the officer isn't buying it. Kike refuses to drop the weapon, leading to an all-night standoff, with Kike holding Zero hostage. Once he was able to get his hands on the gun, there was nothing to stop Zero from unloading the entire mag into his captor's chest. The evidence of Zero's torture, the armored van with the bomb strapped to the gas tank, all back up his story. The standoff goes on for hours as the crowd begins to form and reporters start arriving. Arguments break out as to who is wrong and who is the real criminal. The hostage negotiator arrives, and as the crowd chants for Kike to kill Zero, he lets the young man go and gets back into his van, which explodes several seconds later. It's risky to rely on the mob, the mediator, or the maniac for our survival. Even though Kike's the man with the gun, he's appealing to the crowd to justify his decision to end Zero's life. This means appealing to the crowd indirectly, but more effectively appeals to Kike. We need to draw attention to ourselves, drawing pity in any way we can. We should be begging individual people in the crowd for help. Crying, pointing to a person and making eye contact while begging for our life will physically connect us to them. We cease being a symbol that they can punish and become a person they specifically are condemning to death. At the very least, it'll leave them with a guilt trip if we're going to go anyways. Luckily, the mediator was able to keep us alive. Ultimately, with our strategies, Ciro lived and Kike died all the same. But given the fact that the 4x4 could have been beaten with a well-charged phone or a spotter, and the fact that the car and its creator went up in flames, I think the trap truck from 4x4 was beaten, with less suffering, blood loss, urine drinking, physical rehabilitation, and PTSD. Thanks for watching, and remember, your minor misdeed may be somebody's last straw. And remember to check out Omaze for your chance to win a Tesla Model X Plaid by going to omaze.com/nerdexplains.